The evolution of the bimbo. What do Prince Charming, Lorelei Lee, Fred Jones, Karen Smith, and Ken all have in common apart from their hair color? Well, they're all bimbos, or in the men's case, himbos. Both terms have been used to describe people with very specific appearances and behaviors, and they've become an increasingly popular archetype in film and television, being easily identifiable because of their coiffed hair, tiny dogs, six-pack abs, and lack of brains. While the bimbo has been around for nearly a century, the himbo is a newer invention. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about both of them, from the origins of the tropes, to their most iconic examples, to their growing cultural relevance. Let's get into it. In order to understand the himbo, we first have to get to know the bimbo. Often used to describe a woman who is considered conventionally attractive, hyper-feminine, and empty-headed, the term and the trope effectively served as the inspiration for the gender-swapped himbo we know and love. Ironically, the word bimbo was initially used to describe an unintelligent and brutish man, being derived from the Italian word for baby boy, but it would begin to develop an association with women in the 1920s. A handful of songs and silent films from the time period used it as a negative descriptor, with the song My Little Bimbo Down on the Bamboo Aisle being one of the earliest examples to use bimbo in a way that alluded to a woman's attractiveness and sexual promiscuity. Although the term continued to be used sporadically for both men and women through the early half of the 20th century, the vast majority of bimbos depicted on screen were women, and when the blonde bombshell became popular in the 1930s thanks to Jean Harlow and Mae West, their characters' provocative nature and penchant for baby talk was conflated with the bimbo, resulting in the creation of the dumb blonde archetype. An offshoot of the bimbo, the dumb blonde became a staple of the 1950s, with actresses like Marilyn Monroe, Jane Mansfield, and the Gabor sisters exemplifying the trope. These women were eventually typecast as such, to the extent that the public no longer thought that they were playing a role, but were actually that sexual and stupid. These early iterations of the bimbo set her up to be the butt of the joke, effectively casting aspersions about that sort of behavior. Although the bimbo was more beautiful than ordinary women, making her the object of male attention and female envy, simultaneously she was an idiot, and therefore could never be taken seriously. Many of these characters also used their feminine wiles to get their hands on someone else's fortune, which on one hand could be interpreted as a cautionary tale against gold-digging women who were shallow and vain, but on the other hand could also imply that the dumb blonde was more clever than people gave her credit for.
Say, they told me you were stupid. You don't sound stupid to me.
I can be smart when it's important.
With the rise of second-wave feminism in the 1960s, the bimbo archetype was revamped in an attempt to appear politically correct, being turned into an action star whose sexuality was no longer alluded to, but something she accepted and embraced. While this could be interpreted as a side effect of the sexual revolution, by positioning her sexuality in a manner that was supposedly liberating, in most cases it just felt like a more blatant form of objectification that didn't have to hide behind film censors. Although these women would occasionally be framed as being self-aware enough to verbally reject their bimbo-ness, they were still buffoons, and no amount of kicking butt changed that fact. In some cases, like 1 Million Years BC or Planet of the Apes, the bimbo became so dumb that she couldn't even talk, a not-so-subtle reflection of a growing sentiment at the time that women should just be quiet and shut up. In the late 1970s and early 80s, the archetype returned in full force in television, with Suzanne Summers in Three's Company, Lonnie Anderson in WKRP in Cincinnati, Goldie Hawn in Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, Georgia Engel in The Mary Tyler Moore Show, and Farrah Fawcett in Charlie's Angels, proving that the bimbo was alive and well. Off-screen, media personality Angeline rose to prominence for her hyper-feminine appearance, sexualized behavior, and ditzy affect, which took direct inspiration from the dumb blondes of the 1950s. However, the public reacted very differently to her than they did to on-screen bimbos, with one publication saying, quote, "There is a sad, desperate quality to the woman who calls herself Angeline, like a clown still performing long after the circus has closed." 1987 was proclaimed the year of the bimbo by the Wall Street Journal thanks to an assortment of scandals that involved attractive young women. There was Fawn Hall, who rose to prominence after she was called to testify to Congress over document shredding, with many alleging that she was having an affair with her boss, Colonel Oliver North. Donna Rice was accused of having an affair with Senator Gary Hart, a scandal which was credited for making him lose his presidential run. Televangelist Tammy Faye Baker gained notoriety for her unique bimbo-esque look, and became a further talking point when her husband was accused of assaulting Jessica Hahn. Hahn would later capitalize on the scandal by building a career centered around her sexuality, although she would say in an interview with Playboy that she was not a bimbo. Vanna White, who had gained prominence for her appearance on Wheel of Fortune, not only released her own best-selling autobiography that year, which was criticized for seemingly promoting a shallow lifestyle, but was also featured in a Playboy pictorial. Vanity Fair even famously referred to the breakup between Sylvester Stallone and Bridget Nielsen with the headline, "Rambo and the Bimbo." A reminder, this was all just in 1987. Throughout the rest of the 80s and 90s, the word bimbo became especially prevalent in descriptions of scandals involving politicians or public figures, with Bill Clinton being hit with so many allegations of extramarital affairs during his presidential campaign that they were coined bimbo eruptions. With bimbos receiving so much bad press, effectively becoming public enemy number one, the entertainment industry pulled back on its bimbo depictions, and many actresses who had become associated with the archetype began taking on roles that were more serious to distance themselves from it. But in the wake of this mass bimbo extinction came the birth of the male bimbo. Sometimes referred to as bimboys or bimbo, spelled B-I-M-B-E-A-U, the widely accepted terminology, himbo, was eventually settled on in the late 80s. The first known use of the term comes from 1988, with film critic Rita Kempley writing for the Washington Post, quote, "Their chest measurements rival Dolly Parton's. Their brains would embarrass a squid. They're bombshells with a Y chromosome. Bimbo, be gone. Hollywood has blessed us with the himbo." Another article from 1988 described the himbo as, quote, "He's handsome and pulls glamorous girls with the curl of his little finger. A himbo is always tan, his teeth flash, his eyes melt women with just one look. Himbos have the world clamoring in their hot little hands." A different article from 1987 described the appeal of the character type as, quote, "The female bimbo was appealing because she wouldn't complicate a relationship by thinking about it. The male bimbo is appealing because he's too slow to get away." Although the himbo was popularized in the 1980s, the trope had appeared in film and television on prior occasions, with Jethro in the Beverly Hillbillies, Rocky in Rocky Horror Picture Show, Moose in The Archie Show, and Tom in Grease. In these instances, the himbo was incredibly dim-witted while simultaneously athletic, traits that would continue to define the trope in the years to follow. Himbos were heavily featured in TV throughout the 1980s, being played by Tony Danza in Taxi and Who's the Boss, Bruce Willis in Moonlighting, Ted Danson and Woody Harrelson in Cheers, and Scott Valentine in Family Ties. Himboism became a cultural phenomenon, and just like the bimbo, it quickly moved off screen, with the term being used to refer to actual people whose behavior and looks appeared to fit the parameters of being a himbo. This ranged from Elizabeth Taylor's husband Larry Fortensky, to historian Michael Wood, to musician Tom Jones. Of course, many of these men would denounce the label. Some male members of the public took offense to the rise of the himbo in the 80s, with one man writing that he found the trope sexist and requested an invention of the female himbo, sarcastically saying, quote, "I'm sure your male readers like myself, and your female readers will find it most interesting." I guess he didn't realize that the himbo was already based on a female trope that had persisted for decades. When asked about the popularity of the himbo, sociologist Michael Kimmel said, quote, "I think this has less to do with men being more jerks these days, and more to do with the fact that women are now playing around with the fact that they can objectify men the same way men can objectify women. If women can be objectified for having large breasts and slim waists and large hips, then men can be objectified for having abnormally large shoulders and small waists." Kimmel would go on to say that there were two types of himbos, one aimed at women and the other aimed at men. Characters played by Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone, and Dolph Lundgren were the ultimate guy's guy, and while they weren't the sharpest tools in the shed, their action-driven storylines, combined with their macho appearances, made them the envy of other men. Whereas Fabio, David Hasselhoff, and Tom Selleck were depicted as stud muffins, beefcakes, boy toys, thus appealing to women, but coming across as a joke to men. The trope continued into the 1990s, where they reigned supreme on TV. Himbo characters from the time period included Theodore Huxtable in The Cosby Show, Lowell Mather in Wings, Eric Matthews in Boy Meets World, Joey Tribbiani in Friends, Uncle Jesse in Full House, Slater in Saved by the Bell, Michael Kelso in That 70s Show, and Joey Russo in Blossom. We also began to see more himbos in film, like George of the Jungle, Batman and Robin, The Cowboy Way, Election, 10 Things I Hate About You, and To Die For. All of these characters were as attractive as they were unintelligent, but had varying levels of narcissism, athleticism, and confidence. In many cases, they were also depicted as playboys, although some were more successful in these attempts than others. But similar to the bimbo, very few were ever seen as real relationship material, and were instead someone for the female characters to fool around with for short stints. In some instances, like Friends or Boy Meets World, the himbo would become stupider as time passed, edging into parody territory, and their success with women would plummet in relation. I find this interesting as it showed that while women were amused by the trope and could humor the dumb boy toy, it was only to an extent. And just because they were attractive, that didn't mean they could be complete imbeciles. Whereas when it came to the bimbo, for most men it seemed like the stupider, the better. In the mid-90s, the bimbo finally made her on-screen reappearance. This included characters like Fran Fine from The Nanny, Romy and Michelle in Romy and Michelle's High School Reunion, Cher Horowitz in Clueless, Hilary Banks in The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Kelly Bundy in Married with Children, Tiffany from the Child's Play franchise, and Kim Parker in Moesha. While the bimbo had always been depicted as attractive, the 90s made fashion a bigger aspect of the character, with these bimbos loving to shop and wearing eccentric clothing. This not only reflected age-old sexist stereotypes about women, but was also symbolic of the character's materialism and vapidness. While some of these characters were ditzy to an unbelievable degree, there was occasionally more to them than meets the eye, highlighting how women shouldn't be underestimated based on their looks or behavior. The girl power feminist movement was all the rage at the time, which encouraged independence and confidence in one's femininity, an idea which seemed to be somewhat reflected in these on-screen bimbos. However, in the real world, being a bimbo was by no means a compliment, being used to refer to Playboy models turned screen stars like Pamela Anderson, Jenny McCarthy, Anna Nicole Smith, and Carmen Electra, who were ridiculed on a mass scale for their appearance, behavior, and intelligence. Paris Hilton, Nicole Richie, Heidi Montag, and eventually Kim Kardashian became the new standard when it came to bimbos as the decade progressed, with their exploits being splashed across the front pages of the tabloids and showcased on the reality TV shows. As a result, any young, attractive woman who had the wrong type of fun was often branded as a bimbo, with the public making assumptions about her sex life, intelligence, and personality. Sometimes it was just a case of guilty by association. You may recall Paris Hilton, Lindsay Lohan, and Britney Spears hanging out in 2006, which was immediately coined the Bimbo Summit. While the rise of bimbos in the public eye had lessened the popularity of the character type in Hollywood back in the 1980s, in the 2000s it had the opposite effect, with a proper bimbo renaissance occurring. Influenced by famous women of the time period, the brainless beauties began acting as spoiled brats in addition to their pre-existing characterization. In film and TV, this included Elle Woods in Legally Blonde, Karen Smith in Mean Girls, Shelley Darlington in The House Bunny, London Tipton in The Sweet Life, Sharpay Evans in High School Musical, the Marchetta sisters in Material Girls, Poppy Moore in Wild Child, Molly Gunn in Uptown Girls, Haley Dunphy in Modern Family, and practically every female character in White Chicks. While some of these projects set out to subvert expectations of the bimbo, effectively chastising the audience for making assumptions about them based on their appearance, others almost punished them for their bimbo behavior, forcing them to learn the error of their ways, resulting in the reformed bimbo. Yes, just like the meme. With some of these projects being aimed at children and tweens, promiscuity wasn't as large a part of the bimbo's personality, but you'll note that they were often more boy-crazy than other characters, still alluding to the trope's origins. Although the bimbo had taken back her crown, himbos could still be seen on screen throughout the 2000s, with Hansel and Derek from Zoolander, Fred Jones from the Scooby-Doo movies, Johnny Storm in Fantastic Four, Link Larkin in Hairspray, Daniel in Ugly Betty, and Edward in Enchanted. Some of these himbos were successful in the romance department, although their immaturity would occasionally cause hiccups, but it was in the tween space that himbos thrived, effectively becoming the big man on campus. In these scenarios, the himbo would still be dumb as a rock, something often acknowledged on the show, but because he was cute, it didn't really matter, which would often serve as a lesson for the female protagonists. While a handful of bimbo characters existed in the animation space, often falling into dumb blonde territory, it was far more common to see himbos. This is likely due to animation being the perfect medium to amplify the himbo's physical appearance, growing bigger than even the biggest bodybuilders. Even though they could climb mountains or fight monsters, they were still inept, often needing others' help in order to properly accomplish a task. Just as the bimbo had long been lumped together with the dumb blonde, by the turn of the 20th century, the himbo and the dumb jock had become synonymous with one another, which was a pretty obvious evolution for the character type, considering the himbo had long been as athletic as he was thick. While the dumb jock character had existed for decades, serving as the perfect foil to the dorky nerd, most of their early depictions weren't classified as himbos as there was nothing about them that was considered attractive, whereas the himbo jock typically had some sort of charm, which was epitomized by characters like Duke Orsino in She's the Man, Beaver in Greek, Chad Feldheimer in Burn After Reading, Mitch in Paranorman, John Tucker in John Tucker Must Die, Sam Evans in Glee, Jason Stackhouse in True Blood, Seth Powers in Ned's Declassified, and Aaron Samuels in Mean Girls. This later evolved into the frat boy himbo, who, regardless of their actual ties to the Greek system, liked to party, pull pranks, chase after girls, and act like they were smarter than they actually were. I'd compare it to the action star himbos of the 1980s in the fact that many of these fratty characters were meant to appeal to men, having a lackadaisical lifestyle that some might find enviable. As we moved into the 2010s, the bimbo once again disappeared, in large part because of feminist movements of the time period, which widely condemned the archetype as sexist.
You stupid, meddling bitch! Yes, there's your real voice! My ex-husband is gonna see this, he's gonna find out where I am, and he's gonna try to run me over with his car again! I changed my appearance to get away from him!
Oh, because I thought it was like pressure from society.
Two distinct types of himbos popped up at the time as a result. One was the clueless golden retriever type, who was reminiscent of himbos of the past. These characters were dumb as a rock, but had good intentions, making them attractive for reasons beyond their appearance. Because of this, they'd often have heroic storylines where they were able to prove themselves. With more and more people requesting diversity from the entertainment industry, many of these meatheads wound up being played by Asian actors, subverting some of the biggest stereotypes that dominated Hollywood's depictions of Asians. Historically, in the American film industry, Asian men were depicted in one of three ways. The first as a mystical martial arts master, the second as a bespectacled nerd, and the third as a clueless outsider who had no understanding of social norms. In all of these instances, they were considered unattractive, which is why the Asian himbo is such a breath of fresh air. Characters like Dong Wen in Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, Josh Chan in Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, Jason Mendoza in The Good Place, and Paul Cho in Beef are examples of the trope, being incredibly dim-witted, but also desirable. While Asian men have been depicted as clueless in the past, now they're dumb just because they're dumb, not because they're different from everyone else. Up until this point, the himbo had been a fairly non-threatening individual, at worst being described as shallow, insensitive, or a womanizer, but he was hardly what one would consider a villain. In the 2010s and into the 2020s, that's all changed, and it's becoming more common to find versions of the himbo who do have ill intentions, ranging from jerks to assholes to outright predators. Some iterations of this himbo learn from their mistakes and change for the better, while others remain eternal man-children. In both cases, it's made clear to the audience that their behavior isn't acceptable, and by framing the character trope in this negative manner, it could be seen as a criticism of toxic masculinity. Case in point, Ken in the Barbie movie, Jeff in Bottoms, or Jamie Tart in Ted Lasso. While the himbo has been a constant presence over the last decade, the bimbo has yet to make a full comeback, with the few examples from recent years including Madison in Zombieland 2, or a handful of characters from Sex Education, which is rather surprising considering the popularity of bimboism online. A reclamation of the term and trope, the movement focuses on women's empowerment through femininity and sexuality in the hopes of destigmatizing the bimbo label. While some have praised the movement for promoting self-acceptance and framing political issues in a more digestible manner, it's also seen its fair share of criticism, with some saying that it plays into sexist stereotypes, that it excludes women of color, and that it promotes consumerism for the sake of the aesthetic. Both the bimbo and himbo exaggerate attributes that are associated with their respective gender for the purposes of comedy or commentary. In the case of the bimbo, she loves the color pink, spends more time holding a mirror than a book, and never sleeps in the same bed more than one night in a row. Obviously, none of these things are inherently evil, but because of how the bimbo has been framed over the course of several decades, these behaviors have developed a negative connotation. Because women have historically held less power than men, the vast majority of bimbo depictions can feel like punching down, which is why films that have flipped that narrative continue to be seen as classics today. As such, I can understand the argument for bimboism, but I also think it's important to acknowledge that there are people who won't understand the satirical nature of the movement, and it will instead further reinforce their misogynistic ideals. As someone who gets a kick out of the character type, I would love to see an over-the-top buddy comedy starring both a bimbo and a himbo. If it was done the right way, not just, haha, look how dumb they are, I think it could serve as a really great lesson about not judging a book by its cover, and that just because you aren't as smart as someone else, you aren't less deserving of respect. Who are some of your favorite bimbos and himbos? I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Bye!